Yeah.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. As I'm sure many of you have heard, the big news today is the fact that Oklahoma and Texas have shown interest in joining the SEC. And the SEC is interested in adding them. This was a shockwave, guys. This was a bombshell that was dropped today, of course, in the middle of SEC media days, in the middle of talking season for a lot of the big conferences around the country. And so today we're just going to very briefly kind of discuss what is happening right now with Oklahoma, Texas, and the SEC. We're going to talk about whether we think it's a good idea or not, because this was shocking. This was shocking, very unexpected. You know, every year around this time, we're talking about conference realignment. We have heard this story before about the SEC adding members, about Oklahoma, Texas, and countless other programs maybe leaving their conferences or joining another. But this was very unexpected to happen right now. And it's so serious, guys. It's so serious that there's a possibility we could formally announce the addition of Oklahoma and Texas in the SEC in just a matter of a few weeks. Now, the SEC Commissioner, Greg Sankey, is refusing to comment on this, but of course he would. That's what you're going to do when you're in that position. You're going to wait until things really become more serious and finalized. It's not finalized yet, but it's looking very, very promising. So, guys, if this happens, the SEC is going to become the first super conference. They're going to become the first 16-team super conference, and that's going to change the landscape of college football as we know it. It's going to drastically change the landscape because it's not just going to be the SEC of the super conference. It's slowly but surely going to start the formation of other super conferences to compete against the likes of the SEC. And if you're into conference realignments, if you've been following college football, that's always, again, a discussion point. What would happen if we just had 4 or 5 mega conferences that encompass the entire United States? What if we had one of those? What if we had, obviously there's the talk now about having the Power 5 and then the Group of 5 being separated. So the Group of 5 does their own thing and crowns a Group of 5 champion, and then you have the Power 5 doing their thing and they're the national champions. I mean, if this really does happen, especially with 2 schools as big and powerful as Oklahoma and Texas, it's going to change the game forever. And obviously there are so many questions and so many logistics that are going to go into this. The first one, what's going to happen to the Big 12? If Oklahoma and Texas were, in fact, to go join the Southeastern Conference, what happens to the Big 12? They'd be left with 8 teams. They're not going to stay at 8, guys. Oklahoma and Texas make up the majority financially of the Big 12. They are the Big 12, and that's no disrespect to everybody else. Iowa State, Baylor, Oklahoma State, because a lot of, even TCU, plenty of those teams have made a name for themselves and have been contenders. Iowa State will be this year. Baylor, Oklahoma State, TCU, guys like that have been in the past. So no disrespect to them at all. But if you lose your 2 biggest teams, that would be like the SEC taking out Alabama and LSU or Alabama and Georgia. Guys like that. That'd be like removing them. That's what's happening here in the Big 12. So what would happen to the Big 12? Do they add more teams? They've always talked about expanding, getting more. They're the Big 12. They've only had 10 teams. Do they bring in some guys from the American Athletic? They bring in some independents. You know, we've heard talks of UCF, Boise State, BYU, SMU, so many guys across the country potentially coming and joining the Big 12. Is this the time that we finally see that? Or do we see the remaining Big 12 members dissipate and go to some other conference? And then we start to see the formation of super conferences. That's the million-dollar question. What happens to them? What happens to the SEC? You've got 16 teams. Are you going to have 2 8-team divisions? Right now it's split to the East and the West with 7 teams each. Well, if you study geography, you know that would make more sense for Oklahoma and Texas to be in the West. Well, one of them's going to have to go to the East if we keep it like that. So do you have 2 8-team divisions? Do you do away with divisions and just have one 16-team conference and the top 2 teams go to the conference championship like the ACC did last year with the addition of Notre Dame? Do you switch to 4 4-team divisions, kind of like the NFL does in the AFC and the NFC? Do you do that and then have some sort of playoff system to finalize the top 2 teams in the conference, and that's your SEC champion? I mean, again, the logistics of this are so complex and so complicated. And again, it would change football as we know it. And that's another thing too, guys. This is not just a football thing. That's something we have to keep in mind. If Oklahoma and Texas join the SEC, It's not just for football. It's going to be for basketball. It's going to be for baseball. It's going to be for gymnastics. It's going to be for women's basketball. It's going to be for everything. And obviously, from a financial standpoint, this would be a huge benefit to the SEC. It would be a huge benefit to Oklahoma and Texas. From a financial standpoint, this is fantastic. But from a football standpoint, at least in my eyes, it is not good. I don't think this is good at all. I'm not necessarily opposed to conference realignments. I'm not opposed to necessarily major super conferences if we can do it the right way. But this would drastically change it and really force everybody else's hand across the country. So again, financially it makes sense, but again, this is not just a football thing. This is an everything thing. This is an every sport thing. And the last thing I want to kind of touch on here too is, and I'm sure many of you have had this thought cross your mind too, is can Texas and Oklahoma really compete in the SEC? Texas has one 10-win season since 2010. They had one 10-win season since 2010. They haven't won the Big 12. Texas has not won the Big 12 since 2009. How do you expect Texas to compete with the likes of Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M? Seeing that rivalry renewed would be fantastic, along with Texas and Arkansas, we should add. But Alabama, LSU, Texas A&M, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, the likes of those teams every single year, how can Texas compete with them when they can't even win the Big 12? Same can be said for Oklahoma. We've seen how Oklahoma's fared in the SEC, against SEC in the playoffs lately. They gave Georgia a great game, one of the best Rose Bowls we've ever seen, one of the best playoff games we've ever seen. Gave them a run a few years ago, but blowout loss to Alabama, another blowout loss to LSU. Can they compete? Again, they're going to beat some teams. We saw what Oklahoma did against Florida in the Cotton Bowl. I'm not saying they can't win in the SEC. And we don't know what the landscape of the SEC is going to look like 10, 15 years from now. Alabama, LSU, Georgia, the guys that are elite right now might not be in 10 or 15 years. Oklahoma and Texas could be. College football is constantly changing. Teams are going to constantly change. But as of this moment, Oklahoma and Texas, I will say, cannot win in the SEC. They will beat some teams. They will make it competitive, but they would not be able to win in the SEC. These two teams right now have a better chance of making the playoff, making a national championship if they stay in the Big 12 than they would if they moved to the SEC. And I think a lot of us can agree on that. So that's the million-dollar question, guys, is what is going to come of this? Is it going to happen, first off? Still remains to be seen. It seems very, very likely. And again, college sports is now a money game. We're seeing the game change a lot. We have the NIL, name, image, likeness. We're seeing that coming into play now. Bryce Young from Alabama making over $1 million. So players starting to get paid. Conferences starting to change. It's all about the money. The SEC knows that. These teams knows that. And if that happens, every other team in the country is going to know it too. And they're going to have to make a move that's going to be financially responsible and financially beneficial for them. And that might mean the creation of super conferences. Greg Sankey at the SEC Media Days just the other day opened up with a long quote, a long line from Bob Dylan's famous Times They Are A-Changin' song. And the times they are a-changing, guys. Things are changing very, very quickly. I am not in favor of this movement. I am not in favor of this. I don't think this is going to be good for the change of college sports, but I don't have a say in it. So all we can do now, guys, is sit back, watch how everything unfolds. But it is looking like it's very, very possible that this will happen. So leave your thoughts down in the comments below, guys. What do you think of Oklahoma and Texas possibly moving over to the SEC? Is it really going to happen? And if it does, what do you think it means for college football? We desperately want to hear from you. Definitely want to hear from you. Want to talk about this down in the comments for a while. But quite the bombshell that was dropped today. I'm still a little bit in shock of it, and we'll continue to keep you updated as we hear more. So again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Predictions will continue tomorrow, and if we hear anything else, we'll of course take a break from them and come back with a video like this. But make sure to stay tuned for those. And as always, guys, thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.